This program is brought to you by cable franchise fees and generous donations from viewers like you.
Okay, so I'd like to call the Finance Committee of the Amherst Town Council together for its meeting of May 12, 2020. This meeting is a virtual meeting. It is being held pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law 30A, Section 18. This meeting of the Finance Committee is being conducted, therefore, remotely. And what we're going to first do is have an introduction of our new finance director who started yesterday, Sean Mangano. And then I'm going to go through the group one at a time and ask everybody to introduce themselves and to say hello to Sean, and then so that he gets a chance to know who everybody is. And what we're going to do is also use it as an opportunity for you to assure that we can hear you and you can hear us. So that's it's a dual purpose thing. So Sean, welcome to back to Amherst.
Thank you. I can hear you well, and thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, and I think I know just about everybody on the screen, so, and even the people's faces I can't see. So yeah, but I can hear you all right.
Well, I think the only picture you won't see is Mary Lou, but you know her pretty well.
I know Mary Lou very well, yeah. Hi, Mary Lou, if you can hear me.
Mary Lou, can you hear us?
Mary Lou, if you're on the phone, can you press *9 to raise your hand? I'll try and get in touch with her and see if we can resolve that.
Is she
okay, in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and Lynn, you can hear.
I'm glad to have Sean back and take this opportunity to thank Sonia for all her work all these years, keeping it together and helping us move forward.
Kathy?
I'm here.
Okay, and you've met Sean, I'm sure, before. So.
Yes, I have, and we are delighted to have him back.
And let's see, Pat DeAngelis.
Hey, how are you, Sean? Welcome back.
Hi.
And I really appreciate that we have managed to bring you back into the family. But Sonia, I really, really, really want to thank you, and not only for all the hard work you've been doing, but the fact that I consider you a friend as well. And I hope we get there too, Sean. Take care.
Dorothy, Pam, hi.
Hello, I'm here, but somehow I'm on desktop and screen share. Not quite sure why. So I'm not supposed to be there. I'm supposed to be able to see you guys. So okay, there I am. Okay, hello everybody. Hello, Sean.
Hi.
Hello, Sonia.
Okay, so I think we have two other members of the committee who are resident non-voting members, which is provided in our charter, and you probably know about that. And you already said hello. I don't know if Mary Lou is back. I'll come back to her in a minute. Sharon Pavanelli, you know, because she's been on the Finance Committee before. Sharon, can you hear us?
Hi, Sean.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
And Bob Hegner is the one person you may not have yet met.
No, we've met. We've met. Hi, Sean. Welcome back. And I can hear you.
Okay. And Mary Lou, can you hear us now? Has anybody been able to check on the Mary Lou connection?
I sent her an email. I don't have her phone number, so I can't contact her. If someone can send her a message to please call me. Mary Lou, I sent you an email to please call me.
Okay, does somebody have the number? If not, I can try and call, but while Holly makes a presentation, because what I want to do is.
I have her number. I'll send it to Athena.
Okay, so you want to, why don't you take care of that then? Thank you. The first agenda item I'm going to go ahead and get into because we have a lot we want to cover today. I have a somewhat of a timed agenda. I'm not going to be real strict on it, but I'm going to try to keep us moving. And I want us to start with the FY20 third quarter report. And Holly is going to present that today. And so we want to get your presentation first. And I don't know, would you like to have it on the screen?
That's up to you folks if you want it on the screen or not. I'm having technical difficulties, so I'm sharing with Sonia right now because I was just disconnected from the internet. So she's stepped 6 feet away and I am here now.
Okay, see if I can.
So I'm ready to go. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead and I'll try and get it up on the screen.
Okay. So the report is available on the town's website under our accounting page. This is the third quarter report and we are 3/4 of the way through our fiscal year. And as expected, we'd like to be at approximately 75%. We'd like to see all of our percentages right around that. But not everything happens spread out nicely across our fiscal year. So most of the variances that you see from the 75%, they're due to timing issues. We were in pretty good shape through March 31st. I'm sure that many of you are going to have questions on the fourth quarter. And but today we really want to focus on the third quarter and where we were at March 31st. So our revenues, we're at 78% of our budgeted revenues for FY20. I'm going to go over just a few things. You know, there are more things in the report here spelled out. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them. I'm sure there'll be questions. So the golf course revenues, they were on track through the fall season, but now due to the course not being able to open, we will likely not be able to make our budgeted estimates right now. The other thing is the Medicaid reimbursements, which were pretty low at this point, but those typically come in June as a very large payment right at the end of our fiscal year. We do expect that that will still come in as that is billed in arrears. And even though we haven't had, you know, school going on, those should still come in. One of the other things is and this is something that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds, hotel-motel taxes, meals taxes, cannabis taxes. Those taxes that come through the state were on track. They go through February. They are a month behind our normal quarter due to the way that the state reports them. We are going to probably see a drop in those, but we have already met our current estimate for those in this fiscal year. Simply because cannabis tax was not included in our budget last year. So that money that has come in will help to offset what we may have as some losses in hotel, motel, and meals taxes. The special assessments, you will also see are low, but that is the Ppta assessment, which again typically comes in at the end of the fiscal year. That assessment is based on ridership and numbers from, I believe, 2 years ago. So we do still expect that that will come in. It did come in now? Okay, so I was just informed that it has just recently come in. So as of March 31st, it wasn't here, but it will be here. So that will be on track as well. Our expenses right now are at 74.8% of our budget. There are a few things that I just want to talk about there. If you look at the report, our snow and ice was overspent on March 31st, and that was due to a large encumbrance that we put in at the beginning of the season for sand and salt. And then as the winter season goes through, we will adjust that and that encumbrance. And hopefully we are done with snow for this year, although I'm not really certain. And we have already adjusted that, and we will come in just under our budget in snow and ice. So that will not be, as long as we have no more snow, weather permitting, that will not be overspent this year. You will also see that the down at the bottom, the transportation authorities, which is a cherry sheet charge, shows that it's been overspent, but we have just recently found an error in that, and we are working with the state to correct that, and that should be taken care of anytime. So that overage there will go away. That was an error on the state's part, and we're working with them to get that fixed. Our enterprise revenues have been trending down, and unfortunately, with what is going on right now, that is a concern for us. We are watching everything closely, but this is something that we will be paying close attention to. Water and sewer charges are going to be affected by the simple fact that bars, restaurants, the colleges, all the businesses, many of our businesses are closed right now, so they are not using the amounts of water that they typically would be using. The colleges, I think I'm pretty confident in saying, are our biggest users of water and sewer, and without UMass being open, that's going to be an issue that we are going to have to work through. So right now, we are closely monitoring all our revenues and all of our expenses, but the good news is that the third quarter was not really affected. We are on par with where we typically would be at this time of the year. Again, due to the timing of most of these things. And I know that our new finance director, Sean Mangano, who I'm so happy to have with us, and Sonia will be updating you as the fourth quarter is coming to a close. And there will certainly be a lot more work and a lot of attention paid to the fourth quarter. So questions? Sonia and I will answer any questions.
Andy?
Are there any questions?
So, I'm now co-hosting for two reasons, and I had my hand up, but when you co-host, you can't raise your hand.
Yeah,
So let me just mention that Mary Lou is in the audience with the phone, and I will monitor to see if she has questions. Okay?
Okay.
But she can hear us. We just are having difficulty hearing her, but hopefully that will resolve itself. But
did you have another question?
Yeah, I have two questions. What is the average amount we have invested at any time?
We have invested at any time. That would be a question for Sherry Boucher, for our treasurer. I don't think that Sonia or myself would be able to answer that. We can get the answer for you.
Right. And then my other question was, at the very end of the written part of the report, you say expenditures are within reasonable range for each of the enterprise funds. And they are now, but it sounds to me like we should not anticipate that to be true for the fourth quarter.
I don't necessarily see a problem on the expenditure side with any department. I think that the problems will be with the revenue side, and the revenue's not coming in.
Okay, so in other words, the expenditures would be consistent with our projections for the FY budget, but we may not have the revenues to cover it without going into reserves.
Let Sonia.
We are anticipating a small revenue deficit this year for the general fund. Remember, I said yesterday that we would be collecting about 99% of our revenues. But we're going to have returns from our expenditure side that will get turned back in that will offset that deficit.
Okay. Those were my two questions.
Enterprise funds, like Holly said, we're really watching those because they're trending down anyways because consumption was down, and it takes 2 years for the budget to catch up. And we were making those corrections this year with the rates and everything, but then COVID happened and kind of threw it all up in the air again. So Sean and I have our work cut out for us this week. And we're going to be looking at that next.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Kathy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I saw that you, on the revenue from cannabis, you're not yet putting it into our revenue base, waiting to see exactly what it is. At least that's what I understood you to say. So my question is as we close out FY20, both on the expenditure side, but also the revenue side, and we discover that we had this revenue, when we get to the other part of today's discussion, is it revenue that could be available for 2021? You know, so in other words, if we have some money that's come in and it's actually a surplus, it's a surplus because we didn't budget for it?
Right, so we did not budget for it because we didn't have any history. We didn't have any idea how much we would be getting. And when we did the FY20 budgets, we didn't even really quite know that it was going to be when it was going to be happening here in Amherst. So it was not part of our original FY20 budget estimates. But it is general fund revenue and it has to be recorded in this year. We cannot move it to another fiscal year.
Let me just try to rephrase it then, so the revenue comes in FY20, but if FY20, as you close out the year, once you get full expenditures, if we've actually generated a surplus, you know, in other words, we're under budget, you know, so that's my question on it. You know, I know you're not going to know that until we actually see all of fourth quarter.
So let me try to clarify that. We budget our revenues line by line, but it's bottom line that matters. So when I say there's going to be a revenue deficit, I'm already including that cannabis revenue. So that's helping our bottom line. So we're still going to have a deficit. Now, if COVID wasn't happening, that would be excess that would fall to free cash, basically.
Okay, and then my second question was on enterprise, and I don't think we need an answer now, but it feels like once you get a better grip, we're going to have a focused discussion on it, on what you think for the implications are for FY21. And one of the questions I had
Absolutely.
is, we authorized a big grant for a study and then at some point construction. So I don't know whether some pieces of that are postponable because they were going to be incurring debt that would then be drawing down on reserves, you know, so on, you know, protecting reserves. So just, I know
we're
you all
look at all of that.
Okay.
And Andy, can I add something?
Yes.
So just on the cannabis, so we don't budget that. We were wise not to budget that. I noticed that in a neighboring community, they did budget it, and the bottom fell out of all that revenue, and so now that created a significant deficit for them. So until we have a solid history, we don't budget for it, and that's a very conservative way to budget for your revenues. And so when the revenues do come in, it just becomes surplus for us, which is a good thing for us to have.
I did think it made sense. I wasn't questioning it, but I was wondering about what you just said, that, you know, we get this little benefit by being conservative. Yeah.
So I don't see any other hands at the moment. I had one question that had to do with Medicaid reimbursement. And it's my understanding of Medicaid reimbursement, correct me if I'm wrong, that we are currently billing, we sort of bill for the year behind. And if that's true, then I just wanted to confirm with that understanding, because we had a downtick in school activity in the second half of 20. So it seemed that Medicaid reimbursements in 21 would therefore be decreased because we have nothing to get reimbursed.
I'm going to defer that to Sean.
You might. So So that's true. It is, there's a lag to when we get the reimbursements. There's sort of a double negative with Medicaid. There's the impact of school closing, which is impacting direct service providers working with students. But there was also a change to Medicaid that was the way the billing was done. That was a legal change that was delaying some of the billing for Medicaid. That also impacted the revenues that we anticipated. So we're waiting for more information from the Lower Pioneer Valley Collaborative, which is the third-party administrator who handles our billing, to give us a better sense of what to expect for the second half of this year and for next year. But we did factor into the projections, which we'll go through. We did factor in a decrease in revenues for Medicaid for the reasons that you mentioned.
Okay. Thank you. If anyone doesn't understand the Medicaid reimbursement, what that's about, you can speak up and ask the question, but get a real brief explanation. I'm not going to go there if no one asks. So seeing no hands, if there's nothing else on the FY 23rd quarter report, now we can let Holly get on to other work for the day. And then if we have additional questions that you think of that you would wish you had asked, we can put it, let me know, and we can put it on the agenda again for a subsequent meeting. But I really want to get on to the major subject of the day, which is to get into questions, start with questions about last night's presentation, and take it from, so I thought it was a great presentation. I really appreciated it. I think it gave us a good starting point and a really good fix. But we did say that today's meeting, we would start the discussion by an opportunity to ask additional questions. And once we've got through the additional, any questions that come up, if anything, I'm sort of looking for things other than the projections, which was asked, a question that Kathy asked last night, along with one other member. And Sonia's going to do a presentation on projections then after. So are there other questions that people wanted to ask about last night's presentation? Or comments? Lynn, see your hand up.
Yeah. I want to just say the thing that struck me about last night's presentation is the work that goes into getting to where we are. And it allows us to have some formulas and so forth that easily can be used as we get more and more information. What is the danger of having is a little bit of what I'm concerned about as we go into this conversation. And that is, we'll sit here and try to solve how to find the extra million or so that we need. And that's not what we need to do today. What we need to do today is understand what we know, what we don't know, and really look at our guidance for the town manager. And so I just felt the need to say that up front. I don't say those kinds of things at council meetings, but it's the focus is guidance. The focus is not for us to sit here and solve the budget problem.
Okay. Appreciate the comment, and we do need to give some guidance to the council, and that's ultimately what I think our aim is today. But we want to, the sequence that I was suggesting is to make sure that we have an opportunity to see if there are questions, and then I think that we're going to dive a little bit more deeply now with Sonia and Paul into sort of the numbers that were behind the presentation, and how they connected. So Sonia, you want to take it over?
Sure, as soon as I figure out how to work this microphone. I just want everybody to know that Sean got kicked off, so he's in my office as well. So he's over here. I'll step out of the way if he needs to come here. So we have 3 projections that I sent.
Yeah, let's see if I can get the projections back up on the screen. I'll do it from here. You have to tell me what you want me to do. Which one to be showing?
A. So A, I would go to the expenditure side first, page 2. Okay, so this is the original.
So is this what you want?
Yes, thank you, Andy. This is the pre-COVID projection. This is what it was based on, and we were well on our way to having a completely done budget, and then COVID happened. But I just want to go through this quickly and let you, so everybody can see that we were at 2.5% increase for all the operating budgets, and we were at our 10% for capital. We had our debt there. We had almost 3.9 million for cash capital. Our retirement assessment was a firm number. Our regional lockup was a firm number. We had 500,000 going into OPEB. And then there was the unappropriated uses below, which is our cherry sheet. And this is all based on the governor's state budget that went out. And we were short 304,000 in revenue. So and I was confident that we were going to be able to cover that. So then if you go to the revenue side, Andy.
I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to think.
Do you want to go? Are you on B still?
I'm still
going to B?
I'm on A.
Okay,
Go up
then we'll go back up to A.
Yeah.
So you have to go. So on the revenue side, we had our property tax, which is the largest section of revenue in 2.5%. And then we had an estimated growth of 600,000, and we were well on our way to getting there and hoping for a higher number. And then our local receipts were all increased slightly, depending on trend. And then our state aid, again, was based on the governor's budget. And our ambulance fund, we were planning on taking 2.5 million. There's the CPA debt service, and then our enterprise funds, indirect cost revenue coming in. And that left us, like I said in the previous page, a $304,000 deficit. So from there, COVID happened, and we came up with quite 3 different projections trying to figure out where we should go. And as the news kept coming out, we just kept making it worse and worse and worse. And we finally decided to just go with worse, which is the middle projection here. And that was based on hoping that we would be back up and running by January of 2021. So then we had to go in and, so these have yellow highlights. I'm trying to figure out whether we should do revenues first or the expense side first. So the yellow highlighted areas are the areas that we have some leeway with. So those are the ones that that we changed. So estimated new growth, we're guaranteed that 450 is pretty steady. I've talked to our assessor and our previous assessor, David Burgess, and that's as of June 30th. And right now they do have about 450,000 in new growth. We're just not going to make that 600 because it's kind of stopped at this point for the rest of this fiscal year. And it's based on this fiscal year for next year. But everything else in the property tax is the same. It's still the base levy plus the 2.5% that we're allowed to increase with Prop 2.5. Our local receipts, that's where we took the big hits. The motor vehicle excise. we're assuming that there's not going to be a lot of new vehicle purchases this year, and vehicles are going to age, so the tax will be lower. Hotel, motel, and meals tax. Our assumptions is -3/4 of the year, because even if we're back up and running by January, there's going to be a lag time. So we're being very conservative and trying and going for the worst. If it's better, great. Penalties and interest, we left that alone. During economic downturns, these usually go up because people are having a hard time paying their bills. I know that sounds horrible, but it's a reality. Pilots assume no change. That's based on the previous year's budget as well. So fees, that's where you would see impact fees, but we're not ready to start budgeting those yet. Rentals, we're assuming that we're going to have to, if we're not opening buildings for half a year, we can't be charging rent. That's what our assumption was. Departmental revenues, this is where the Cherry Hill and Leisure Service revenues are. Half a year, most of Cherry Hill's revenues come in July, so we're assuming 0 there. And Leisure Services too, most of their programs are paid for actually in June. They're deferred and then they roll over into July. So we're being conservative and saying no revenue there. License and permits, we're assuming that's going to go down. Special assessments, that's Ppta, and like Holly said earlier, that's based on 2 years prior. So I think we'll be okay for next year. But this year, but the following 22 is when it's going to hit us because the ridership will show up. Fines and forfeits. We're assuming court fines are going to be pretty low. And there was some library fines in here, but we're not going to be taking those in either. So we took that out of there. Investment income. The reason I have 35,000 is because I know that we have $2 million invested right now that's coming due next year. So we'll have some revenue from that, some investment from there. Otherwise, I would have reduced it more actually. And miscellaneous revenue, this is where the money from Amherst College and UMass Strategic Partnership Program comes in. So I cut that drastically. The 60,000 is mainly going to be Amherst College because that's based on ambulance runs from the year before. So I conservatively budgeted for that. State aid, this is based on level funding from fiscal year 20. Ambulance fund we had to reduce because the ambulance revenues have to be in the account before we can appropriate it. And we're expecting ambulance runs have gone way down, so we need to reduce that. Community Preservation Fund, that's a fixed amount that's already been voted by CPA and it's going to council. Enterprise Fund reimbursements, again, it's based on the previous year, so I think we're going to be fine with that. Then you go to the expense side. Now the expense side is pretty much the same as it was in A. We didn't reduce anything. We wanted to see what our true deficit was, so we didn't reduce any expenses here or anything. We just wanted to see what our bottom line number is going to be. And I just want to point out that the reason this 4408, it didn't balance to the chart on the presentation yesterday is because no one took into account that, because you didn't see it, we're just showing revenues there, and we didn't put the totals because I didn't want to confuse everybody, because the next page would show a deficit that wouldn't balance that. And that's mainly due to the fact that you need to pick up this 304,000 that was deficit and add that to it to get to that number. I just wanted to point that out. So here we are with 400, I wish it was 400, $4.4 million deficit for the operating budget. And if you see below in the red, a 10% decrease in state aid would be another 1.5 million. We're assuming, I highlighted yellow because state aid for the state is down 14.7%. So I figured 15 is a safe projection here. So our total deficit, if state aid goes down that much, will be $6.6 million, almost $6.7 million. So we spent some time trying to figure out how we were going to cover this. We need to move on with our budget. Waiting for state aid, what the state is going to do. We didn't know when that was going to come in, so we trying to figure out how can we move forward on this. So we have an example, which is C. So the revenues are the same as B that I just went through. So if you want to go down to expenses. All right, so the adjustments that that we were able to make are that we have in our tool belt is operating expenditures. So if we level funded all of these, we would decrease the budget by almost 1.7 million. You see it in the red all the way over to the left or to the right. The reason, just so everybody knows, the school has a slight increase, and that's because we it's 0% on their base, and then it's the net of charter and choice, and sometimes that works in their favor, sometimes that works not in their favor. This year they got lucky. And then our capital, we had our 10%, but we can't maintain that 10%. We had almost $3.9 million in cash capital. We reduced that by almost 2.5 million, but we didn't completely obliterate our cash capital so that we could maybe do some roads, and there's some COVID expenses that are going to be coming up, and we'll talk about that after. And then miscellaneous, we can't do anything with retirement, that's a fixed cost. And then there's unappropriated uses, that's cherry sheet, and that's based on what the governor's fiscal year 21 budget was. So I didn't reduce that back to 20 because that's not realistic. I'm sure the charges are going to go up, so I left that way. And I forgot to mention OPEB. We reduced our OPEB contribution to 50% to 250,000. Because we want to continue to contribute to our OPEB. This will help our bond rating, because we're still going to need to go out for a new bond rating when we move forward with our large capital projects. So with that, it balances the overall budget. And our thought process is, instead of waiting to figure out what state aid is and trying to incorporate that into the operating budget, we would commit to using our reserves, which is at $16 million to cover whatever reduction in state aid would be. So I think I covered it.
So I'm gonna have to stop sharing so that I can see if there people have questions now to ask about what was just presented. And for anybody who's at home, this is material that is available on the town website in the packet, so that if you go into the town website through government to budgets, excuse me, if you go through council, town council, government to town council to committees, you'll be able to get the packets through the Finance Committee, and all of this is in the Finance Committee packet. Kathy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. That was, I found the sheets very helpful, and your explanation was extremely clear. So I have a couple questions about underlying. I mean, what I'm seeing that, of the amount, my understanding of what you just presented is, if we had a 15% cut in state aid, we'd be pulling about 2.2 million out of reserves. So we would just that's the way we would offset that. And so one question on the state aid, over in capital, we get Chapter 90 money for roads. Does that get all included? Is that money potentially at risk, or do we think we can count on that in the capital budget? So I have about 3 other questions, but I'll just do them one at a time.
Well, I haven't heard yet about Chapter 90. I don't know if you have, Paul.
So Chapter 90 is money that comes to the town from the state for roads. That's always separate. That's not included in this presentation at all. So that's a standalone item. If it comes through, we spend it. If it doesn't, we don't. Okay.
Okay, then the second, health insurance for FY21. I know we heard what the rate increase would be, and I don't remember exactly what the number was, but if health insurance goes up for each of these budgets that's flat, will we be able to give people, and I'm not going to do the math, ask you to do the math right now, a sense of what that means? If they're going to keep health insurance whole, then the other part of the operating budget, wages and salaries, this is what it would have to decrease by in terms of dollars. It's just a mathematical, if somebody is spending $300,000 in health insurance and it goes up, then the other has to go down. So I think it might be helpful if schools, town, and library are not already doing that calculation to at least do here's one way of looking at it. If I'm understanding what flat would mean, literally no more dollars than last year, but one piece of it is going up.
Right. We're going to have to handle our health insurance increase and any COLA increases or step increases within that level funded. And it's going to be each entity's problem to solve within there. So for fiscal year 21, we already have the rate for health insurance, so it's not going to go up in 21. I don't know what this is going to cost for next year, but at this point, it's a problem. And that's a problem that Sean's here to help out with now. We're going to every department and try to figure out how to cover this.
And just for the record, Sean is here, but he's at a different computer that does not have a camera. So he can see us and he can hear us, but if he wants to say something, he can raise his hand.
Okay, then my next question is on the retirement system assessments. You have kept that continuing to increase at the same amount you thought it would be increased. If wage and salary goes down, I mean, you won't know, is that interactive? So if there's some positions that we don't have anymore, or if a unit decided to forego their step increases, does that affect the contribution to the pension fund?
Yes, if we have positions that haven't been filled during a year and stuff like that, it depends. We have to report payroll as of September 30th every year. So whoever's on or not on would affect it then. So it would, that's one part of the equation. The other part, of course, is going to be what their expenses and what their increases are going to be across the board with the retirement board. But yes, it does affect bottom line salaries, does affect this time.
And my last question, I don't need a definitive answer now on, but the capital one and cash capital went way down. And you have a very specific number, at least penciled in, on how much we would have. Have you already started to put together a list? We had capital requests start to flow in with asking people to go back and say, scrub the list, what's the very highest? So is that amount going to cover whatever people would have said the very highest priority? So it's not I don't need an answer now, but it's such a specific number that you took out and then you ended up with a residual, unless you just did that to get us down to a balanced budget, which might have been.
That's this balanced budget.
Okay, so that
number I could play with.
Okay.
Right. So we haven't gone through capital. I mean, we started to look at it today. Sean and I, we're going to go work with it with Paul and figure out what's on there that absolutely has to happen. Other things have come up because of the COVID. So we'll have a preliminary for you to start with the JCPC soon, hopefully by next week.
Thank you.
Dorothy, you have your hand up.
Okay, I have some pension questions. So last night, somebody said that they can't afford to retire. So I assumed, does that mean that school teachers are in TIAA-CREF, where if the market is good, they get a big cash payout? Or, because if they're in a system like I chose TRS in New York State, where it was a defined benefit pension system and it didn't matter, I didn't get rich when I retired, but I know exactly what I'm going to get, or it'll be a little bit more, you know, with increases. So that was question one on that. And the second one, thinking about New York City's financial crisis, the pension system helped bail out the city. So a question is, where are our pension funds? Are they controlled by the town of Amherst? Are they pooled in with what, Pioneer Valley? Or, you know, where is the money? And would any of it be available for towns?
Paul, do you want to answer that, or?
No, I'd like you or Sean can do that.
Sean has his hand up.
Sean, let's have Sean answer it.
Hey, Sean, you done moved. Okay, Sean, you're on if you can.
Maybe he doesn't have a microphone.
Tell him to come to my office and I'll move.
Sonia, why don't you answer?
I don't really know much about the teacher's pension stuff, so hopefully Sean will be able to answer that. But on the retirement, people's pensions, they will get paid their retirement that they're at this point. I think a lot of what they're talking about, what I'm in a boat with, is like our 401ks or deferred comps. Hold on, Sean's knocking.
So both teachers and the town are in defined benefit retirement systems. The teachers are in a state retirement system. The town is part of the Hampshire County retirement system, and we're one of a number of 30. I'm not sure exactly how many communities are in it, but there are a lot of communities in the Hampshire County retirement system. We're all part of PARAC, which is the public entity retirement system. Sean?
I'm very tired. I just ran down the hall. So Dorothy, what people might be talking about is so you have your defined benefit piece to your retirement, but you can also make optional contributions into a 403B at the schools, and that is tied to the market. So while the defined benefit piece shouldn't be impacted, if they had been contributing to a 403B for the last 20 years, the value of that, you know, very well could have gone down because of what happened to the market. That might be part of what you're hearing, and there's something similar on the town side with the 457. So that might be what you're hearing. Those are tied more to the market, but those usually are supplemental to the primary retirement plan.
Right, because because one way to make savings is in a pinch is if the older people feel like or encouraged with some kind of incentives to retire, then you'd be paying more salaries to younger people at a lower step. I know that in New York City, people gave up a lot in order to help save the city. I'd hate to have people have to give up too much, is really what I'm saying, for the workers to have to give up too much. But I'm glad to hear that it's defined benefit system, which is safer. You don't get rich, but it's better.
So one of the tools that people often will use is early retirement incentives to encourage people to take early retirement. I don't like going down that road because if you replace the person, then it costs you more money. And in local government, you tend to replace the person. So the logic is that you take someone at a higher level and you replace them with a lower level, but within a few years, that person is back up.
Okay.
It might be a tool that we have to take into account, but it's a lower level tool. As we look at all of our array of tools, it's not one that we want to bring to the table at this moment in time. It's not available to us anyway, because we would need either special legislation or it would have to be something the state would offer out to us.
Other questions? Because if not, we can come back to it, but we should go ahead if
So I guess one of the things, Andy, if you don't mind, is just to get a sense of from the Finance Committee is if this is the right direction you'd like us to go in. We took a one target. We chose, we chose where we thought we would be. I thought Sonia had come up with a brilliant idea of tying our reserves to state aid, because that takes that off the table in essence. It allows us to move forward with the development of our budget based on all this other information. So if that's where, and this can play into your budget guidelines for us, if that's a path that you think we should go on, that really opens the door for us to move aggressively in developing our 1 month and our FY21 budgets, because I have no confidence in the state making a decision before July 1. I'm not sure if Sean has any other idea on that, but I just don't think that that's likely to happen.
Kathy?
I think it's excellent. Is the path you've done for a couple reasons. The flat budget, same as last year, is a simple concept to understand. It's not going to be simple to execute, but it can be explained and you can so clearly show, as Sonia just did with a spreadsheet, the amount we saved by doing that. And then if we can live with capital going down by as much as it did, with everybody's tightening their belts and we're stopping the ceiling from falling down someplace on someone, or climbing up steps and finding a hole in them, whatever really doing urgent. That's also something people can say, this is a belt tightening year. And OPEB, the other piece is if we go back into something like more normal, we can catch up if we need to. So it's not cutting an immediate expenditure in the same way, it's cutting funding of a long-term expenditure. So combination, and as you said, this last point is we don't know about state aid. So you've left yourself on a, what do we do if, without then going back to the schools, going back to the library, going back to the town and say, we've got to take more. You've got a way to adjust. So I think it's a very nice mix.
Lynn?
I think it's a nice mix, but it's not sustainable if we're in this worse situation next year. And that's a concern I have. I also think that as we know more, as we approach whether schools will open in the same way and how we will open town hall in the same way, we have to look critically at some of those issues in terms of full deployment of staff. And then finally, it just makes me want to tear up to see us dip into those reserves we've worked so hard to get so that we could actually tackle capital projects, and wonder what that impact will be over time.
Bob Hegner?
Yeah, kind of along that line, what would happen if we've sort of made the assumption that things are going to start picking up again in the January timeframe? What if they don't? Would the plan then be to go back and relook at the budget, or to try to cover more of the deficit with the reserves?
Can I answer that one?
Sure.
So yeah, I think the plan is that we're going to revisit the budget one way or another sometime during next year. Two things could happen. It could get worse, and we would have to reevaluate the budget from that perspective. It's also possible that maybe state aid isn't cut, or there's some other funding source that's made available that we weren't expecting or we don't know about right now. So we fully expect that we're going to have to revisit this budget sometime during next year and potentially make a tweak to it based on what we find out.
And when you say next year, you mean after July 1?
Yeah, after July 1, sometime, after the first quarter, maybe into the second quarter, once we have more information.
But just so I understand, in terms of the agreements with the town employees. I think you said yesterday that if they're on the roster as of June 15th or something, they're on for the entire year. So we would not have any flexibility in terms of staffing changes other than retirements or things like that at that point in time. Is that correct?
Yeah, for collective bargaining staff, we'd have to follow the terms of their collective bargaining agreements. I think that day was specifically from the schools. But yeah, we'd have to follow the terms of the collective bargaining agreements. Not all staff belong to that, but we would have to follow those terms. And yeah, there's some vacant positions and things like that we could look to as well.
So that June 15th day applies strictly to teachers.
Okay. But that's a big chunk of the budget.
It is a big, yeah.
So
it is a big chunk of the budget, and just to make my own comment is that we also have an interest in having stability within classrooms, because we're talking about the teaching experience for kids who have had a disrupted year already. And so to the extent that we can give them stability next year, I would think that that would be something the superintendent would be very interested in doing. Let's see, Lynn, did you have something? If not, Dorothy.
So I'm now rethinking about using the capital or putting less into the capital. And in my mind, I keep thinking of capital as the 4 capital projects. And then I say, no, capital is roads and sidewalks and trucks. And that's, I'd be really upset if we don't get some roads and sidewalks fixed. And I really don't want to see that they go away, that they don't get fixed. It's the thing that people talk about the most, the thing they want the most. And I know it's expensive, but I hope that we don't have to go back to saying, well, we just got to live with it for another 10 years.
I think it's a good point, and I will come back to that, Dorothy, because that was on my list when we get into some of the budget philosophy questions for building into the guidelines. It was exactly one of the questions that I wanted to ask. Okay. So thank you for bringing it up, and we will get back to it.
Andy, Sharon has her hand up.
Sharon?
You have to unmute, Sharon.
So I just wanted to say, I think I'm just going back to what Sonia said as she began her presentation, which was this is a focus on what things we can control. And I think that's a really good way to focus our thoughts on this. And I think it's highly understandable that any plan we make now it has the potential to change based on whatever happens going forward. I really like how this has been presented. It's very easy to understand. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Well, thank you.
And having been through state budgets, mid-year rescissions, I still get very nervous when we make an assumption that's not like this. And I want to go back to 2008. I was at the university at the time working with all kinds of state agencies, and the mid-year rescissions were just brutal because basically you have to make up with the 6-month period what should be a year long. So I think we need to keep our ear to the ground very carefully, which I know we're doing, but this budget relying on reserves as the way to make up the difference, if we're in a mid-year rescission mode in November, December, January, we could end up with just about no reserves left.
I think part of me thinks about reserves as what it was back in 2008. It was predominantly a rainy day fund, which is what we're using this for now. And I think that there was always the realization that a portion of the reserves would be needed for that eventuality. but we built up the reserves not for the purpose of helping us with the 4 capital projects, but I don't think it was ever thought that it would be 100% of the reserves for that purpose, that there was always going to be some reserves that would be used if we had to for a particular difficult year. A couple other observations about this. We're in a different position than some towns, that we work with, particularly in the region, but not different from some of the other cities that we compare ourselves to in other ways, in that the smaller towns tend to be much more dependent upon property tax, and property tax gives us stability because it's a higher percentage of their budgets. And we've had the benefit over the years of having a more diverse revenue source, but we also have larger needs, and we take on the consequence of what's happening within this particular period. I hoping that we don't get into the position of 9C cuts. We didn't. The 2008 9C cuts were much earlier in the process. They were before we got into the 2009 budget cycle. They were imposed upon us in the year that the crisis occurred as opposed to the next year. And that's just sort of made it different for planning purposes for the town, and I don't know if it would have been for where you were, Lynn. Other thoughts on this subject, because Paul did raise exactly what I thought was the next question, which was, is this the right strategy to develop a balanced budget for FY21? And it seems that the consensus is running that it is. Kathy, your hand is still up. I don't know if that was...
Yeah, I just put it up again because to address Lynn's concern and also Bob Hagner's that, and then what Sean said, if we get 3 months into FY21 or 4 months, whatever the time period, and things are much worse than we thought they were going to be, or it's looking much worse, can we write the guidelines that we're recommending to the council that ask the town manager to come back and reopen the budget discussion? You know, the same, if this is the budget as we think it's going to be, you know, so come back. I don't know what the words would be like that, but this is, we think this is the path that we can address it, but we reserve the right to come back in the same way we've redone all the budget deadlines as emergencies, that you would come back in with an alert that we need to take another look because we're not getting, and we might not be getting property taxes coming in. We've not had high deep rates of defaults in the past, but that revenue might not be as secure. So I'm just thinking, can we write a clause in that wouldn't hamstring running things, but would allow us to have that kind of look again?
I'll turn it over to Paul to respond to that in just a second. The property tax is sort of, I've had this discussion with people involved in budgeting in other towns. Property tax debt doesn't go away. If people don't pay their property taxes because they can't in any year, the debt remains to the town. And it's a hard thing to say. And I don't mean to be a cruel, difficult person in saying it, but it's a distinction of when you get revenue rather than whether you'll get revenue. And that's another reason why it's good for a town to retain some form of reserves and free cash and stabilization, because it allows you to give forbearance on that late payment, but knowing that the tax liability stays with the property. Paul, do you have anything to add on the question that's on the floor?
So I think that answered the question about the revenue coming in. In terms of looking at the budget, I think it's going to be something we're going to be watching. And as Sean said, looking at it in the fall and monitoring it. We're all going to be paying attention to everything. The beauty of the town council is that we can bring it back to you very quickly, and we can adjust it much more nimbly than other towns can do it. And if it looks like it's going to be a all year thing, where our local receipts, it's really local receipts that's the variable here. That we, if we say, wow, things just aren't opening up, and are those revenues? It's not a gigantic piece of our budget, but it's something that we'll be able to calibrate pretty quickly, I think. So, but I don't think you have to put in a set date, come back by such and such a date. I just think you'd want regular updates, which we're going to do on a regular basis anyway.
We do have a practice in the town of doing quarterly reports. I assume that practice doesn't go away.
So if I can add to that, Andy, so one of the things, and what we talked about last night, was that we would like to get started on, once we put the FY21 budget, get started on the FY22 budget right away, because typically in October we do a financial indicators report to the town council, and it's to the budget coordinating group actually, and we'd like to keep doing that, be up on that, because that will be a crucial presentation this year, and that will be also a good time for us to be paying a lot of focus early in the fall to what's going on.
Okay, and I make one concluding comment and then see if there are other people from the who want to be recognized, and that is that all communities, whether they're towns working with town meetings or cities working with councils, the legislative body passes a budget, and once the budget is passed, the administrative arm of the town, however it's governed, of the city, then has the money available because it's been appropriated. If we were a town, we'd be in the same position. Town meeting would vote a budget, and then the manager would have the budget available. We assume that our executive branch is managing the budget wisely and with eyes open about what's happening in the broader world, because we all have an interest in not just the year that we're in, but the years ahead. And so it's a shared process, and I don't think that it's what we're dealing with is actually that different from other communities. So anything else that people want to say on this? And for the members of the public, we are going to have a period of public comment in a little bit in the agenda, and I just want to confirm that, because I had said it last night, and we certainly want to give an opportunity if anybody wants to be heard. So is there anything else to say, or is there, can we assume that there's comfort with the strategy that was proposed last night and has been discussed today? It seems I'm going to take it from Dorothy. You have your hand up.
Yes, I do approve of the strategy, and I don't worry about things because I know that if there's a question that we'll be called back in. I just wanted some kind of assurance that if going forward things get bad, that if there are reductions, that people will take them at the top with salary decreases and not take away things from the bottom. For example, I may be wrong on this, but I think that we voted that library part-timers would be covered by some health insurance. We didn't vote that? Oh, so then there's not that much to take away then, is there? Anyway, so just concerned that the people at the bottom don't lose what they have. That's all.
Okay. So where we are for next is then I wanted to turn the question if we're generally happy with the strategy to recognize that the next process is going to be the budget guidelines. And what I'm assuming is that what we're going to discuss on budget guidelines, what we have already discussed about the general approach, I will encompass in a draft and get the draft to you as quickly as possible so that I can get individual comments. We have two options for us. One is to just leave it that I will do a draft and send it to you, and then you have to send comments only to me. There's no opportunity for further discussion because we're not in an open meeting law once we adjourn today. So you could only send comments on the draft to me to incorporate in, but we don't have an opportunity for a meeting. The other possibility is to quickly post a meeting for early in the morning on Friday if there's a desire to have additional meeting time available, another opportunity to come back and talk about the draft. So I'm going to raise that question again at the end of the meeting so that we have an opportunity to make sure that we're okay with the process going forward. Budget guidelines really get into the question of some philosophical questions, and I have started a list, and I'm going to start with the list that I've developed. But what I'm going to be looking for at the end is for all of you to add, in addition, questions that you might have that I didn't hit upon, because I think these are things that we need to think about as a finance committee. Council needs to think about. We have to have a common understanding in the town, and we probably want to get something into our guidelines to address them. So the first question that had come up about, and Paul and I have had this discussion a little bit before, level services is what we had defined as the goal in the original guidelines. And there is a difference between level services and level funding. And it has to do with the increase that we hope to have for the most part. So I want to have a little bit of an opportunity to see if anybody has any questions or comments about how they envision us dealing with that reduction between the two, because there is something less that we're going to be able to do because we're not having inflation factor built into the budgets. We're going back to the amount so that inflation factor that was originally projected is lost. So that's a sort of a general way to look at it. And then I have several other sub-questions under it, but I didn't know if anybody has any general comments on the first. So, not seeing anybody who's willing to venture into that topic. Underlying second piece is that one of the assumptions that's built into the presentation that was made last night, and has actually been pretty much of a standard budgeting practice in how we have been moving from year to year, is the presumption that within each of the major functional areas, municipal schools, library, and regional schools, we try and have the increases be by an equal percentage. And so level funding is a lack of increase or lack of decrease, but it's however you're going to term it, it's still maintaining the exact balance and that has been there as to how each the portion of the entire budget that goes for operating expenses to each of those areas. And I think if there's anybody who wants to raise any question about that, they should say so, because otherwise then our presumption, our guidelines are that that's what we're recommending. And Lynn, you have something?
Yes. This goes back to my earlier point, and that is that once we pass June 15th, there is no way that the schools will be able to take an equal cut, at least the way I understand it. So the burden of the cut beyond June 15th would have to fall to the town and the library. And so I don't understand how we can, that's the issue for me. It's the issue of who is going to take what level cut after June 15th.
Kathy?
I have a question on June 15th. I mean, this is a worst case scenario, but if you put a notice out that there will likely be layoffs, but we don't know which person, are you covered? You know, so, you know, since you don't know yet whether it's a staff position that would have to be changed or whether people might have to agree stable positions to reopen the contract, to not take step increases, you know, I mean, all the different pieces that are possible within level funding. If the schools only get a flat budget, then the school system is in real trouble if there's no give. And then you go back into how many of the people are out of the unit, you know, not in the unit covered by those contracts. So it becomes an internal, you know, how much of the pie is already cemented. And that was one of my points about health insurance. If we're not cutting health insurance, something has to happen on the everything else side. And so there's not much time. I mean, we're in the middle of May, but we've been able to protect everybody's jobs so far, unless people have just left voluntarily. But I think that is the hard internal discussion. If we give a flat budget, same as last year's budget, to the elementary school and the regional school system, they're going to have to come back with how do they live within that amount of money, that it's not coming out of the town side or out of the library side. That's what I understand we're doing, but maybe I don't understand it.
You have hands from Dorothy and Mary Lou.
Mary Lou's looking for.
Yes.
Okay. So the old-fashioned way of dealing with cuts in the schools was to increase class size. We cannot do that until we're totally out of this whole pandemic or whatever else is coming down the road. So we cannot increase class size. So I lived through the budget cuts of New York City. I sent my kids to school, and what they did was they cut music, they cut art, they cut science. I just can't see Amherst living with that, particularly not our incredible schools with the great music and art. So I think we're going to have to say the schools are going to be our top priority because it's too difficult to do it. And the children, the school children, have lived through a very difficult semester with relatively random online instruction. And I'm doing online instruction, both at the community college and with my grandchildren. It's exhausting. Anyone who thinks it's not, hasn't done it. Even I did 2 Zoom classes today before this meeting. I am wiped. And you have to do so much more. And I'm now getting from my students, what methods do they like best? So it's going to be some Zoom class, some Moodle where they can, some pre-recorded lectures that I will do, chat rooms. I'm going to have to learn 3 new platforms. I'm going to have to learn Discord, which allows the students to get together on their own. It's extremely exhausting and very intensive, the work that will have to be done by the teachers. You just can't cut corners. I mean, the old way of increasing class size won't work. It just won't work. So we don't have that much flexibility is what I'm trying to say. The one thing is we do have a decrease in the school children, in the size of the population. That is the one thing I can see that could reduce some costs. That's it.
Mary Lou, can you, are you on the phone? Having problems getting Mary Lou to get connected.
So you see, Andy, what some of the process is. People lose connectivity. It's you know, we don't have this whole infrastructure set up, and people are dealing with all levels of connectivity.
Mary Lou, I'm going to suggest an old technology, and that is you call me or I call you, and I just have my phone on speakerphone in front of the mic. Okay?
Okay.
Mary Lou, my phone number is 413-530-3629.
So we'll hope that Mary Lou can get back to us and recognize her when she comes in. Any other thoughts about the question that we're raising right now on planning schools and how we deal with that?
Bob has his hand up.
Bob, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether, I mean, I share the concerns, and that's why I raised the question originally, that once we get into, you know, after June 15th or after a certain point in time, we're kind of locked in many ways. And I'm wondering whether as part of the budget process, we should ask, you know, each of the 4 units to have a backup plan. In other words, if revenues fall short by another 10% or something, and your budget shrinks by another 5% or 10%, what would you do? How would you manage this? And I understand that there's a timing issue on that, but it seems to me that that's a very important kind of contingency that we should be as prepared for as we possibly can.
And how do we weigh stability within a year versus our goals for holding on to reserves? To what extent can or should we think about looking at reserves as the ability to maintain some stability within a budget year? Dorothy, is your hand up or you just?
I don't know whether this would be in place, but we're talking about difficulty with the school budget and aspects of inflexibility due to contract things. And I was just wondering if our new finance director, with his extensive experience in the schools, had any thoughts of places where there was movement, flexibility in the budget.
Well, that wouldn't be fair.
It's Lynn.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So I don't want to speak for the school department anymore. I want to respect that barrier. But one thing I do want to know is that there's so much uncertainty about next year and the expenses next year. That you hear me? I'm getting Lynn. Picking up Lynn.
Lynn, can you mute, please?
I'm sorry.
All right, that's better. That there's still so much uncertainty around next year. I mean, if things are really bad and students don't go back to school, we don't know what transportation costs will look like for the school. The transportation costs could be lower. Food service costs, supply costs. I still think we're in that stage where we really don't know what expenses are going to look like next year, which makes budgeting very challenging. So revenues could come in lower, but expenses could also come in lower as well. There's a lot of uncertainty. So I think this is, we're trying to work towards a plan, and we'll be prepared to adjust that plan next year when we have more information.
Add something to that, Andy?
Yes.
So I think I totally get where Bob is saying we should have contingencies, but at this point, we're asking our staff to do a 1-month budget and then a 13-month or 12-month budget in a relatively short time frame. And I think that it's just too much to ask for a limited staff to pull that together. I think the June 15th is a focus is on contracted teachers. There's a lot of other pieces, as Sean mentioned, in the budget. So if there is a cliff that we fall off of, there will be hard decisions. And the first decision is the first one Andy brought up is, will that be borne equally across all 3 bodies or not? And some towns and some communities choose to say, we're going to prioritize schools. They are held harmless. The entire cuts have to come to the town or the libraries or wherever. So all those conversations will have to continue. So there's so many uncertainties, and I think we're all thinking about what's the next step. If we have to cut again, what do we do? And what we're trying to balance is maintaining the goals of the budget policy, which is maintain the services that we can for the people, which is what the council had said last December, as they say, maintain the services that we have. We think they're good, and providing stability to our staff and for the services, but managing these budget cuts. Just lots of questions, lots of ways to get there.
Yeah. Lynn.
Hold on. Go ahead.
Can we hear?
Hold on.
Right. Hi. Now can you hear me? Okay, good. I want to thank the staff for the various options here, and I do support C. I think going forward with the same budget as we have this year is good at this point, and then some readjusting may have to be made. Going back to what Andy said earlier about the 208 to 10 time, we did plan for a rainy day fund, and I think some of that should be used at this time. We were not anticipating 4 major capital projects, and that's good that we have that money, but I think it would be wise to work as best we can with C and then adjust as we go along, but recognizing we may need to use some of the reserve funds. That's it.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure how we do need to be prepared to be flexible within the next year if there's a need to be flexible. I don't know if it's going to be harder for some segments of government to make those adjustments than others. It does take us into the area of what's more equivalent to 9C cuts that Lynn was referring to earlier. So, but we have, I think that our hope is that the COVID-19 situation is getting behind us, and it's a question of how quickly the economy is going to come back. What else can we assume?
Sharon has her hand up, Andy.
Sharon?
I just wanted to, again, go back to something Paul just touched on, which is, everybody who is in charge of a budget is in exactly the same position that we are, and has the same information that we do, and that information is, again, what Sonia said, we have to figure out the aspects of what we can control and prepare for, and prepare for that. The library is going to do that. The schools are going to do that. And, the guidance that we're giving them, they can model how we're thinking to prepare. And I think that's all that anybody can expect at this point. And I think it's very understandable, even with the uncertainty from Baker, what is going to happen in, at the end of this month, at the end of next month, in terms of where this, where the testing is, and, where businesses are, and where, the college is, and where the university is. I mean, those are huge factors that all we can do is come up with a plan as best we can. And I think this is a reasonable plan. Just wanted to throw that out there again.
So thank you, Sharon. And where I think we're at probably is that when we talked about level funding initially, what we were recognizing is that we provide a range of services. And to the extent possible, we would like to see that none of the services be eliminated. But we recognized all along that changes get made because management decisions have to be made, that some element of that particular service needs to be increased or decreased, or changed in just how it's delivered. And we look to that because we always value creativity, we value flexibility. And I think that's sort of the underlying principle that we're dealing with in what's being proposed, is to say, to the extent possible, we want to continue on. And the public safety is important. The public works is pointed out earlier by Dorothy when she was talking about the capital side of it, but also the maintenance side of it is valued by our community. Our community services, this is a year where we've really valued the community services and seen how important they are to our community. So I don't know that we want anything to disappear, but we want management to make wise choices about how to handle those budgets within the amount that's going forward. Implied in that is one other point, and that is that we're not looking to any significant new initiatives in 21. And I think we just need to be clear about that and recognize that when we write our document that we talked about new initiatives previously that we hoped we might be able to get to with new revenue. New initiatives are off the table in 21, and we're not optimistic that 22 is going to give us the ability to take on huge new initiatives, but that's a decision that's not being made now because we don't have to. Is that a statement that anybody disagrees with or has nuance to? And if not, then I would just sort of make that as a core part of what we're doing. One other thing that I wanted to touch on real quickly and then go on to another thing, and that is the 1 month budget. I've been calling it a 1 month budget, not a 1/12 budget. And the reason is, and Paul and Sonia or Sean can give examples, but there are some things that are payments that don't happen evenly throughout the year. And if the staff that are going to be proposing a 1 month budget say, there is an expense in July that needs to be paid right away, and therefore it's going to mean that it's not exactly 1/12. That's what we expect to have happen, as opposed to an exact 1/12. And I know there's we get some bonus and some savings by paying our retirement right at the beginning. So that's an example of what I would be thinking about in saying that. But I want to just make that clear so that we get it into the document we're writing, and we don't have any confusion when a budget comes to us for the month of July and it's not, somebody says it's not exactly 1/12. So I wanted to have that covered beforehand, unless there's disagreement amongst this group. Okay.
Andy?
Yes.
I have a very naive question around the flat budget, the 1 month budget, or the flat budgeting, which I support. Normally we look at 2.5% tax increases. I'm assuming with the flat budget that we are not looking at tax increases. Is that accurate or inaccurate?
No. When you looked at that presentation that Sonia made at the beginning, she assumed that the 2.5% that was part of the revenue base that was in her calculation.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Paul, if you want to add anything at any point, I know you'll just let us know. Lynn, you're muted still.
I want to go back to the point you made about not looking at any significant new initiatives. I want to say, unless they create efficiencies and less cost.
Yeah, it's a wording question, and but I think it's a good point. Thank you. What I was saying is that I assume that we're not taking away from management's responsibility to try and provide core services in the most efficient and effective manner possible. And if changes are appropriate to make, because in their judgment, if there's a shift that need to be made, that's something that we hope that creative management does. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Yes.
Because if not, there's the other things I wanted to get back to and make sure we had a few minutes to talk about are capital and OPEB, and then I want to see if there's any public comment that people want to offer. So the capital question had come up earlier, and Kathy, you're chair of the Joint Capital Planning Committee. What kind of guidance do you think JCPC can give to us, and what might JCPC look for from the council and the finance committee?
I went back this morning because Sonia had, we've been posting capital requests, both the schools and the library, and then a series of town requests were up, so you could see, and people were labeling it high priority or high, or no one ever rates it less than high. Very high and high are the two ratings that tend to be on the requests. But I think JCPC is going to have to send back we want you now to think about urgent. and that cannot be postponed, and make an argument for it, because I'm looking at least what was penciled in as a capital budget. The cash capital is around 1.4 million, which is a $2.5 million lower amount than what we were looking at before. So it means some big projects that we're going to incur debt probably aren't on the table for FY21. If there's going to be room for roof repairs. So that's what I think, giving that guidance back, and then to put the Lynn piece in on, if it creates efficiencies to invest in something. And one of the things that we've all seen is how important being able to be linked to the web was for the school kids, that there had to be a GoFundMe to give a kid a computer, because if they didn't have wireless at home, the computer was useless for online courses. So there may be some things we have to do because we're thinking we're going to be working from home more often or linked in other ways. And it's clearly been critical for town businesses to be able to do. So some sort of guidance that think creatively, but think urgent, because when I add up the requests that had been on the list, it's a lot more than what we're talking about budgeting. Which was also why I asked at the beginning about Chapter 90, because as Paul, you said that's not in our cash budget, but are we still counting on $850,000 in road repairs that's not directly out of our own cash budget? So getting some information about that would be important. Now, in terms of the timeline has JCPC reporting out by June 1st. And we've been told not to hold any meetings yet. So I think we need to, if we're going to have JCPC have a role, call a meeting for next week and maybe one shortly after that, or there's no possibility of doing a report by that committee. So we had one member of the committee asked Paul will there be a need for JCPC at all? Is the town manager and staff going to just come up with the short list of projects? But I think, having some discussion about what that short list is a healthy thing to do.
And you recognize, Paul, just point back to Dorothy's comment from earlier, in which she talked about the importance of not letting roads be totally neglected. Paul?
So I think Sonia did mention that we were looking to get JCPC meeting next week sometime. It's probably going to only be one meeting where we can go through what Sean and Sonia have been able to distill down is something that, and hearing what you're talking about today and seeing and talking to department heads about what their urgent needs are. Department heads have already been told that the capital is going to be pretty low this year. Schools have already gone through theirs. We've identified some, we know that we're going to have to put a plug number in there for COVID-19 activities, whatever that is. If it means how to open schools or whatever, we don't know exactly what that number is and where we're going to place that, but we know that that's something we have to put in there. I agree that roads and sidewalks, we don't want to lose our momentum on that. And in terms of Chapter 90, the state was about to act on that when this hit. They had a hearing, and I got something a few days ago. It's in the Senate Bonding Committee, but whether when it lands on the governor's desk, if he's going to act on it or not, nobody knows, because he's in the same boat we are. Like, how can I spend money on roads, on giving money to cities and towns when I've got all these other things? I'm $1 billion in the hole here. So, we can't hold our breath for that, but we'll be lobbying hard to get him to release that money, because I also think that that's part of our rejuvenation of our economy. It puts people to work, local people to work on local roads that matter. So.
Other comments or questions of what Paul just said? So, and of course, the other thing that comes in with capital is the major building projects. And think we probably are all realizing is that we still need these buildings to be attended to, that the analysis that these are 4 problem areas within our infrastructure isn't going to be lost, and our commitment shouldn't be diminished, that they be priorities for the town. The question is when we can get to all of them, and will the timeline be elongated from the beginning to the end. We also are dealing with 2 that have significant grant money and grant-driven timelines along with them. That's not a decision that we need to ask the council to make, or even probably want the council to make right now, because the decisions on each of those projects will be made in due course as the time is right to do it. The loss of reserves does create a problem, which will be shown when we get around to working with the model that Sean helped us develop some time ago. It hasn't been lost, and it's but as we reduce the amount of reserves, it's going to affect the ability to use reserves to smooth out the bumps that occur, and may therefore affect decisions that have to be made. So in any event, I would probably propose to say something along those lines, just essentially that the commitment doesn't diminish to the projects, but the timeline and other aspects will have to be revisited as we go forward, but it's not a decision that needs to be made now, and we encourage the council to remain committed to addressing those 4 buildings. So now I can look for comments on that piece. Seeing Bob, see your hand up.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of echo that, Andy. I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about is I know I've raised a lot of issues about sustainability of the budget, but we also don't want to lose sight of those investments that we need for the long-term, stability and growth of this town. And I hearken back to Abraham Lincoln, who finished the Transcontinental Railroad in the midst of the Civil War. So we might have to bite the bullet sometime in the next 2 years, but we at least need to consider, these investments and what they mean and how important they are. So I just don't want to have us lose sight of that.
Sharon?
I would echo what Bob just said, and just not losing sight of it, but also showing the town that that it is worthwhile. It is something we want to do and need to do, and in some way have that kind of something out in the future that we're still working on. I mean, I think what we're all experiencing is this giant unknown. When are we going to get back to normal, and what is the new normal going to be? And I think that's important to show as the leadership of the town, that we are planning on moving forward, and we want to move forward, and we can move forward, and this is how we're going to do it. So
Lynn has her hand up.
Lynn? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to set the record straight. There was one building on books back in 2006 that went down the tubes in 2008, and it was a fire station. So it was not an empty slate at that point. And having said that, however, from my standpoint, first and foremost, it is a school.
So, but you're not suggesting we put that into the proposed guidelines at this point. Okay, and anything else? And because the other thing I just want to see is that if there's nobody who wants to say anything, proposal was made by the town manager and finance director to still apportion half of the amount of money for OPEB as has been was originally proposed, in part because of recognition of the long-term debt and in part to preserve our bond rating and look towards the future for the same reasons. I assume, unless we decide otherwise right now, that that's a principle that we're adopting as a committee and to suggest to the council. Yeah, Lynn.
I think one of the people that's in the audience is going to ask the questions, but let me just go ahead. By only paying half, will we hurt our bond rating?
Paul has his hand up, Andy.
Yeah, Paul.
It's one element. The bond ratings, the biggest factor in our bond rating is the economic health of the Commonwealth. And at this moment in time, we have readjusted how we're looking at our bonding. We were going to go for a bond rating in September when school reopened. It was sunny and blah, 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 but that's not going to happen now. We don't want to be seeking a bond rating at this moment in time. So hopefully it really, our little town, that's a factor. It's a commitment, and I think, but it's not a gigantic impact on us.
$250,000 is $250,000, and it's a long-term obligation that we have, but it's a significant amount of money in the year that we're in.
And I also think, when you compare it to what others have done in municipality, what we see in comparisons, we're actually ahead of the game. We look healthy in what we've been doing. Despite the fact that this notion of pre-funding the retiree health, it hasn't happened in the private sector and it hasn't happened in the public sector, so that we've been putting earnest money down, and it's a big chunk of money that we've been able to do. So we look relatively good, I think, on this aspect.
But you're not suggesting we not do the contribution this year?
No, I think cutting it in half makes sense, because if we can catch up, and it was spread out over a long term that we've been amassing the funding.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do then is see if we have any public comment, then come back to the committee to see if there are other issues that members of the committee wish to raise, talk about what we're going to do on the next meeting, and then see if we can draw it to a close. So I'm going to go back to screen share now, and what I'm going to be putting up is the agenda. And the reason that I'm doing that is that the agenda gives information for members of the public, if they wish to do so, on how to do public comment, and it reminds you that you can indicate your interest in being recognized. So I'm going to have to see if I can go back to the participant list too at the same time I'm doing this. That's the trick that I've got to deal with.
Andy, no one has their hand up right now.
Okay, that's
attendees.
So if anybody wishes, raise their hands, and then Kathy will let us know that you did, so we can get a listing. Kathy, no one's raised hand.
No, nobody's raised their hands of the people that are logged on as attendees. So
Okay, then I'm going to go to stop share and let us finish our agenda for the day. So were there any topics that members of the committee had hoped would come up to today that haven't and that you want to be able to raise now?
I think the only one is a question you asked of us, Andy, on the report. You gave us an option of you draft a report, send it to everyone, and we send comments back to you, or convening a meeting on Friday where we talk about it as a group. So that would, I just wanted to come back to that. I mean, my preference would just be to send comments to you rather than trying to pull us back together Friday, because you also need to get the entire report done and on the council's agenda. But I just want to come and circle back. You gave us those choices.
And I was going to, it had to go under scheduling next meeting. But we do need, so does anybody have a different view on that? Otherwise I'll do my best. I will work with Kathy probably on getting the draft into shape to send to you, and we're gonna, but I'm making an effort to get that done by tomorrow as promised, so that there's a day for you to look at it and comment, and then to make adjustments after getting comments from individuals.
Lynn's hand is up.
Lynn?
Yeah, evidently one of the people was not able to. Could you just speak to the issue of the regional school budget and where we see that at this point?
So the question, you were told that the question was to speak to where the regional budget process is there?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. Paul, do you want to take that, or do you want me to take that?
I think you or Sean. Do you want to try it, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give you my understanding. So the region is also in a position of having to do a 1-month budget. They have to submit that budget to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, I think by June 1st. And so that means they're gonna have to do a lot of work over the next couple of weeks to get that budget drafted. And because we also use, there's a process that they have to do around the assessment method as well, because we aren't using the statutory method. They're probably going to be, I assume the regional schools will be reaching out to the council and town manager pretty soon to talk about what they need. They're going to need some additional documentation with the packet of information that they sent to the department to get their 1-month budget approved. So they're going to be working on the 1-month budget over the next couple of weeks, and they're probably going to have some requests of the town council over that time.
And as far as the full year budget, it will go into a shortened process, but still having all of the same steps that were in the prior budget. The town meetings in the other 3 towns have been pushed back in their dates to times in June, and they may have to be even be asked to be put them later. But the school committee has to pass a budget, which then goes to the town meetings for approval, and the assessment method will have to be negotiated through some sort of process, but will presumably be something like what had been negotiated before the COVID-19 crisis came up. And then would need to be approved by each of the communities, because we rely on both knowing what the total budget is and what portion of it we have to pay to know what we have to pay. So, but as we're doing as a town, with doing the 1-month budget to give more time, it seems that that's the direction that the region is going to. And that's a large, they have a large problem because they get a significant amount of, some of their budget is based on Chapter 70 and regional school transportation, as Sean told us many times over the years. Okay, then I think that we probably are finished. And as far as the next meeting date, I'm going to poll the committee separately if we're not, but we will not be meeting. At least we know we won't be meeting this week again, and we won't be meeting next week. And I will poll the committee about availability for standard meeting times afterwards. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity before too long to actually have meetings in person again. So anything else anybody wants to say? If not, I will consider us adjourned at 4:30. So thank you very much.